This visual I have is a representation of the original title of the talk I had, which is Chat-Oriented Programming, or CHOP in action. You can see that it represents that, right? And what it is this new paradigm of programming with chat as the primary model that you interact with code, really. And I think most of you probably have experienced it already to some extent with stuff like ChatGPT, maybe Claude. But there's a lot more to it than creating a simple application with it, let's say a Flappy Bird app. So that's why I want to get into this particular topic. I want to give you the 12 most important principles for using AI for coding, so that whenever you use AI for coding, you can be a lot more efficient than you are now, maybe 10 to 20% more efficient. Best case scenario, maybe 30 to 40%. So let's get started here. The first one I want to cover, which is actually not part of the 12 principles, you could call it the 0th one, is your coding and software engineering skills that you might have built before AI was introduced. They matter. They still matter, yes. I think some people can relate with that. And you could also argue that they matter even more with AI, because AI, the way I see it, is something that amplifies and reflects whatever you are, whatever knowledge you have. So if you're a great developer, with AI, you can even be a greater developer. You can be even more efficient. That's great. But if you're a bad developer to begin with, you might produce a lot of bad code with AI. So that's the first point. And principle number 1 is that it might be an unpopular opinion, but you don't have to pay for any AI tool at this point. You might already pay for it. You might want to pay for it. There's nothing wrong with it. But in my opinion, you don't have to. And that's because there's enough free usage for these AI tools, like ChatGPT giving you a decent amount of free usage for GPT-4o. There's a way to create images for free if you want to use them for a design doc, a blog post, stuff like that. There's a way to use Google's latest model for free through Google AI Studio. And there's a way to use Claude's latest model, the most advanced Claude model, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, for free through Sourcegraph Coding as well. Disclaimer, I work there now full-time. I started there about 7 months ago. And there's another one called LM Arena, which is primarily designed for comparing different models, but you can also use it to directly chat with any of the models that they have from different providers, as long as you don't hit the rate limit. Principle number 2 is this formula for effective prompting. It's a simple formula consisting of simple ingredients. You want to provide a lot of context that's relevant as much as possible. You want to make your intention clear. What kind of output do you want? And you want to provide as much details as you need. And on top of that, you want to go through a few trial and error cycles. There are 2 main ways of doing it. One is to continue the conversation and then keep adding more details within the conversation. The other way is to go back to your previous message, change it, and see if you can change the results. Number 3 is that context is king when it comes to using AI for coding in particular, but using AI in general. I think most of you have heard about prompt engineering. You might be interested in it. In my opinion, it is a little bit overrated. Prompt engineering does work. It is a way to say certain things or use AI in a certain way so that you get slightly better results, maybe 10 to 20% better results, maybe 30, 40%. But in my opinion, once you master the art and science of context management, you can get 100% better results, 200%, 300% better results. So in my opinion, context management is in a way a lot more broader and effective than prompt engineering. And number 4 is that you want to keep your context as short as possible. You want to provide a lot of context, yes, as long as that's relevant. Because as soon as it starts to become a little bit noisy, the performance goes down. There's a good study for it. From this particular study, if you look at the x-axis, that's the number of tokens that's given to an AI model. If you look at the y-axis, that's the performance of each of these AI models. You can see that the more tokens you give it, or the more context you give it, the worse it performs. So you want to provide a lot of context, but as long as it's relevant. So these are principles number 1 through number 4 for AI for coding. But I wanted to go into a specific example to show you how you might want to apply them in your particular scenario using a specific example instead of jumping into the next one. This is coming from my actual personal example where I was at this conference in San Francisco called QCon for senior engineers, engineering managers, people like that. And at the same time, I was in the process of organizing an event in Las Vegas that's coming up soon. And the reason I'm doing it in Las Vegas is because I'm going there for another event, AWS reInvent, which is a big tech event. And I thought, I want to find good partners to work with for this event. And my idea was to go into the reInvent website, and I would find the list of exhibitors or sponsors from there and try to find the relevant ones. Luckily, I found a section of their website, a public URL, that shows all the exhibitors. I was able to just scroll through this list and see their entire 500 companies. But going through them manually would be a lot of work. So I thought, all right, maybe I can just do a screen recording of me just scrolling through everything and then save that video, upload it on something like Google AI Studio, and ask it which of these companies are relevant to the event I'm organizing. That probably would have worked to some extent, but I realized there's a better way to do it because one of the principles is keeping your context as short as possible. If you think about this context as a video of me scrolling the list versus just the list in a text format, the text format would be shorter in terms of the context token count because that's more compressed. So that's what I decided to go and fetch. And going back to principle number 0, I thought, okay, maybe I can use my programming and software engineering skills. I right-clicked one of the sponsors. I said inspect elements. I said edit HTML, fetch that part of the HTML. And I said, give me a JavaScript script I can run on the browser console to retrieve and print the list of an entire companies here. And it didn't quite work the first time, but I went through a little bit of trial and error, and I was able to get the entire list of the 500 companies. Next up, I thought, wait, I'm already at this other conference, so why don't I find a list of companies that are both at this conference that I'm already at, QCon, and AWS reInvent. And I like to say that in the world of AI, Command A and Control A are your friends. And that's because you can just select all, copy and paste everything, give it to your AI system by saying, here's a list of QCon sponsors. And then I said, here's a list of reInvent exhibitors. And I just said to Claude 3.5 Sonnet, give me the common ones. And it did it in one shot, almost. I still needed to ask a couple more questions like, are you sure about this? Can you double check? Stuff like that. But still, by changing a few models and doing that trial and error a little bit, I was able to get the entire list. And I just literally went downstairs, found those companies, and that was a really good start for finding good partners for this event. Now, before going into principle number 5, I want to set the context by giving you, the next example. So that was, like a really small project that I worked on. This one is a medium-sized one, and the next one will be a big one. I started to recently work on this project that would translate the text, whatever text I select on my laptop into a natural voice. People call it text-to-speech. And when I started to work on this project, I had no idea about it, what models to use, stuff like that. I knew that I wanted to use it so that when I see a long piece of text, I don't have to read it necessarily by myself. I want AI to read it for me with a natural voice. But I didn't know that much about this particular area. So I started to use it for research. And when using AI for research, you want to use it with broad questions first. Something like, is this even possible? Can I run it on my Mac? What model should I use? And then go deeper and deeper. Like when you compare this model and this model, what are the trade-offs between those? What about this other model? Is it better to run it on the cloud and stuff like that? But eventually, you run into this wall called the cutoff date. Who here is familiar with the cutoff date? Some of you. So what it is it's the last date of the training data of your AI model. What that means is that AI doesn't know anything after the cutoff date. So if the cutoff date is 1 year ago from now, then it doesn't know anything that happened last month, yesterday, stuff like that. So how can you get over it? If you're doing research, you want to find sometimes latest developments, right? Well, that's where RAG comes in. RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. You might think it's a little bit complicated, but you don't have to know how it works exactly under the hood, not in detail, because there are popular tools like Perplexity, which I recommend. And the way these tools work is whenever you ask a question, it does RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. What it does is it uses a search engine, and it finds the most relevant pieces of content from around the web, from the search engine, whatever it uses, and then supplements your AI capability with those latest answers. So that way, these tools are able to get over this hurdle of the cutoff date. Perplexity is one good tool for that. If you're researching latest developments. ChatGPT is also pretty good, but different tools have different strengths. In my opinion, Perplexity has really cool, strong retrieval capability, but AI smartness, not so much. At least when it comes to their free model. ChatGPT is kind of the opposite. It's really smart, but retrieval is okay. Google AI Studio is somewhere between for both of these types of capabilities. But what I would recommend is using 2 or 3 out of these. Whenever you want to do research, let's say you're trying to decide, should I use React or Vue for this particular project? What are the trade-offs? What are the latest, trade-offs and arguments? Then you don't want to ask just one of the tools. You want to ask multiple tools so that you can get basically, second opinions, third opinions, and so on. Now, principle number 7 here is once you find interesting articles, GitHub threads, stuff like that you want to get into, Reddit threads, maybe Hacker News threads that you want to get into through one of these RAG tools, like Perplexity, ChatGPT, and so on, you can provide the entire text, like I said earlier, Command A, select all, copy everything, and have AI summarize it for you so that you don't have to read everything by yourself necessarily. And that's exactly what I did for this particular Medium article. And I wasn't sure, if it's worth reading by myself, word for word, and that's why I decided to have AI summarize it for me. And then I started to, ask follow-up questions, which I recommend. You can ask stuff like, okay, in your summary, you gave me this information, but where is it coming from? Can you give me quotes so I can double check? Or you can say, oh, I see this piece of code, but can you explain this piece of code line by line so that I don't have to copy and paste everything kind of blindly. So those are principles number 5 through 8. We're going to get into 9 as well as the next example. But how are you feeling? Are you guys ready for principles number 9 through 12? Perfect. Yes. So the next example is, like I said, a large-scale project. It's a production code base that I wanted to work on. Specifically, at my job, we created this feature called Deep Coding. The name might change later, but it is an agentic feature, you could say. But what it is it is an AI system that's based on Claude 3.5 Sonnet currently that's able to take actions on your behalf and decide which actions to take. So if it thinks that it needs to run a terminal command, it's able to do that in a safe way. If it thinks it needs to search through your code base, it is able to do that. So I've been using it. We've created it. I've been using it myself. I found it useful, but some people said it's too slow internally. And I actually agree with it to some extent. I noticed it. It's not that it's not that obvious, but it is noticeable. So I thought, how can I fix this feature? The first thing I needed to do was I needed to go into the actual code base, understand how it's implemented exactly, because I wasn't the one who implemented it. So how can you ask a question about an entire code base? Well, RAG is the answer. You might say, oh, I can use Perplexity, ChatGPT, AI Studio Code, Google AI Studio, and that's fine. But if you try it, chances are you'll find that the quality is not the best because those tools are general RAG tool. They are not RAG specifically designed for a code base. So that's what you want to use. But going back to principle number 1, you don't have to use an existing tool. If you don't want to, you can create a tool like that yourself. The way I would create it, some of these tools are created this way, is take the user query, your own question, and then ask AI, given this user query, what keywords should be searched for in my code base to answer this question. Perform those searches, maybe in parallel, maybe locally, maybe in the cloud, and then combine those results, re-rank them if you want, and then give those search results back to AI and say, here are the search results that I got based on the question. Can you answer the question now based on these search results? Another approach that you can take, which you could say a little bit more naive, is you can say, create a script that gives me all the files and their content from my local repository. So essentially, you can shove the entire code base, if you want, into your context window. For example, Gemini 1.5 Pro can handle 2 million token context, which should be good enough for medium to large scale repo, or at least a large portion of your project. And you can ask questions that way. But the problem is, like I said earlier, when you have context that's too long, the performance goes down. So what you want to do probably is you want to say, well, based on this question and based on this huge context, which folders and which subfolders of my project do I need to look at to answer the user's question? And then you can run this again. Create a script that gives me all the files and their content from these folders, subfolders, and then go back to AI and say, now, given this subset of content from my code base, can you find which folders now I need to look at? Repeat it a few times until the context window is small enough so that it's accurate for answering your questions about your code base. How cool is that? I mean, like I said, you don't have to pay for any of these. You can create it yourself. But of course, if you don't want to do that, you can use an existing tool that does RAG for you in your code base, like Codey, which works pretty well, in my opinion, especially with Deep Codey that I just mentioned, especially with Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which you can get for free as well. Now, principle number 10 is once you know which folders, which files you need to look at, you don't have to give the entire code base anymore. You can just copy and paste those, either manually or by creating a script that copies them for you. PB copy is a friend as well in the world of AI, if you're familiar with that. And number 11 is you want to go multimodal. You might have done this before. Take a screenshot of the error that you're getting. Ask an AI system about it. Or take a screenshot of your team's Figma design and then ask AI about how to code it out. Stuff like that is helpful and common. But one more thing I recommend is whenever you need to write something really long, like a design doc or blog post, stuff like that, instead of writing it yourself with your hands, you can ask AI to do it for you with your own voice. So it's not AI that's writing for you. It's just AI taking notes for you. It's acting as a note taker. So you can literally say, hey, ChatGPT or whatever, can you act as my note taker? Don't change my words, style, or tone. Stick with them, but give my thoughts back to me in a blog post format, in a design doc format, and that works really, really well. And finally, you want to automate some of the boring tasks that you find with AI. A good example of this is a commit message. Who here loves to write commit messages? Some of you. But there are people in the world who don't like to do that because it's a little bit boring. The thing is, your Git system, your version control system should know exactly what changes were made after the last commit. So you can just write a Git command that fetches all the changes that were made after the last commit, give it to AI, ask it to create a commit message for you. Pretty simple. Or you might know what I'm going to say, but you can use an existing tool that does it for you as well. So those are the 12 principles for AI for coding. If you want to learn more about AI for a production code base in particular, I have sort of a 40-minute, 50-minute podcast episode that I recorded. It's on the left. Feel free to check that. And if you're more of a junior person, if you want to accelerate your career with open source and AI, feel free to check my video on the right. And thank you so much.